My father told me that if I looked very carefully, I'd be able to see the bones of ancient dinosaurs as we passed by on the London Underground. Only in the deeper tunnels, mind, he'd say, as I sat with my face glued to the dark glass. The Victoria or Piccadilly or parts of the Northern Line. Though on the shallower lines, like the Central or the District, you can see the remains of plague victims as you pass through the pits in which they're buried. Some of the corpses are still so fresh that the underground workers are worrying about catching them. He trailed off as Mum gave him the look. "Peter, stop it," she said, her lips pinched tight. "You don't have to put him to bed or comfort him in the middle of the night. And another thing, no more Doctor Who. Not until he's 6, at least, anyway." Dad promised he wouldn't, but with a theatrical side wink to me. Otherwise, I guess I might have put up a bit more of a fight. As if to apologise for cancelling the show, the BBC were releasing the older stories on VHS, some in black and white. With a cliffhanger at the end of each half-hour episode, we watched them back-to-back, fast-forwarding through the credits and the titles to find out what happened next. I loved every terrifying minute of it, despite the cheap special effects. Afterwards, Dad would talk and talk about what we'd just seen, suggesting alternative endings, alternative beginnings, and sometimes whole alternative stories. A single line of dialogue, a throwaway plot contrivance, would suddenly take on new depth, new meaning in his hands. I didn't understand a lot of it then, of course. Not then, and I suppose not now. My father's brain didn't work the way most people's did. Mum said it was both a blessing and a curse. What drew her to him, and what pulled them apart. "You have to understand," she'd say, "your father isn't a bad man. Whatever Gramps says, he's just difficult. I thought he'd settle down when you came along. Should have known better. He's not reliable, and that's something you have to be when you have responsibilities." For a while, Dad lived in a flat. A studio flat, and a small one at that, within walking distance of Mum and me. On the occasions I stayed over, I slept on the same pull-out sofa that he did, and we'd lie there watching videos on the small TV at its foot until he felt me drifting off. And then he'd get up and sit at his little desk, chunky headphones covering his ears, his face bathed in the pale light of the boxy computer. Sometimes I'd wake up and watch him silently for a while, wondering at the strange expressions flitting across his screen-lit face. I always used to think he was working, but now I'm not so sure. I think maybe he was playing a game. This man who could craft whole worlds from a single phrase, desperately trying to escape the one he was in. When I was 7, he immigrated to Paraguay. "1 year, kiddo," he said as he held me tight to stop the futile pummeling of my fists. "At most 2. And then, well, I'll be a made man, and it'll be the easy life for thee and thine." Instead, it would be 5 long years before I saw him again, bearded, hollow-eyed, gaunt, a stranger. I shied away from his awkward arms, unable or unwilling to understand what it was he was asking me to do. He wanted me to go to the hospital with him, to a hospital in the centre of London, and to sit by his side as they filtered his blood through a machine. He began to describe the tiny little monsters living inside his veins. They never tidied up, he said, and the mess they left behind was piled so high that his blood cells couldn't move without stepping on a roller skate or knocking over a large pile of dishes. And so the doctors needed to take his blood out and give it a damned good clean. Nothing more than that, he promised. Whether that was for my benefit or my mother's, I couldn't say. Nothing to be scared of. A car wash. From the inside. His story was, I'm sure, meant to awe, meant to delight and amaze. But the most amazing thing was that he thought his childish lies would work on a teenager. An overly tall teenager who the week before had managed to sneak into the Camden Odeon to see aliens. Still, it worked in another way. It made me curious. By the hospital bed, as the machine clunked and hissed, he spun tales of fabulous beasts in magical forests, of silver mines and Spanish-speaking cowboys, of the sail-shrouded ships of the Paraguayan Navy. If I'd have been paying more attention in geography instead of my usual daydreaming, I'd have known then that Paraguay is landlocked. And for all the opportunities he described, he'd come back empty-handed. His life's possessions in one battered suitcase, his most memorable memento, an exotic disease. As he was nursed back to health, as his skin lost its grey pallor, his face fleshed out, and his stories became wilder and wilder. The one thing that didn't change was his beard, and we should have guessed what that foretold. Within a month of being given the clean bill of health, he managed to scrounge together enough for a one-way ticket back. "It's my life now," he said at the airport on my turn back. "It's where my heart is, where I will always be. You should come out and see me." Didn't say anything. Didn't turn around. Not until he passed through security and reclaimed his carry-on bag, its handles bound by coarse string. It was the last time I would see him alive. Within a year, he'd moved on again, this time to Thailand, and then Ghana, and then Saudi Arabia. Whatever he was looking for, he never found because he never stopped moving. I still have his letters. A whole shoebox full of triple-folded sheets with their exotic stamps. I look at them every so often, trying to piece together what it was that he did in those far-off places. Sparsely hidden in amongst the fantastical stories, there are hints of reoccurring illnesses, of failed get-rich-quick schemes, and of women. I imagine him instantly seducing them with promises of riches around the very next corner, and then burning through their life savings before they realise, too late, that it's all only a madman's dream. There are other letters, mixed up with the ones he wrote to me. Letters to and from my mother, saved from the sad pile of things she burnt late one evening towards the end. I'd always wondered how he managed to head back to Paraguay so swiftly. Where had he got the airfare? The letters told me. Whenever the hole that he dug got too deep, he'd go running to his wife, my mother, and she, a lowly paid secretary at the local school, would bail him out from afar. When I lay them out in postmark order, the last letter is hers. A bitter, scrawled tract accusing him of asking for too much. She had me and my future to think about, she wrote, and whatever trouble he said he was in, she knew it was just another ruse to wheedle money out of her, money to spend on another woman. This was it, she proclaimed. There would be no more handouts. She did not and could not love him anymore. What little there was in my educational fund went on repatriating his body back to the UK. The local police said suicide, but he wasn't the melancholic sort. He always had hope, was always looking into a bright, shiny future. Whatever the odds, his endings were always happily ever afters. More likely, he spun his tales to the wrong person and paid the price when the riches failed to materialise. Everything I wanted to be when I was young, archaeologist, tube driver, adventurer, I wanted to be because of his stories. Fitting, I suppose, that I became the ultimate fantasist, a writer of pulp science fiction novels. Because not one of these stories that so inspired me was ever true. I wonder in what other ways he influenced me. Though we both deal in lies, in make-believe, I lack his giddy joy at his own flights of fantasy. My work is more of a struggle. I must ground it, be able to explain it, to rationalise it. My stories lack happy endings, and my life is, except for my profession, depressingly normal. The most exotic place I've ever been is non-inclusive in Morocco. I have life insurance, a family car, family, responsibilities. And yet sometimes I catch myself peering through the windows of the underground, hoping for a glimpse of something magical. There's one other letter that belongs in the collection. It's neither to nor from my father. It's from my mother, and it's to the whole cruel world. 3 months after the pitiful half-dozen of us had clustered around his open grave, and 1 month after I left her to start the degree I could not afford and would never finish, she took her life. An overdose of carefully hoarded prescription tranquilizers. The reasons she gave in the letter are banal and nonsensical. They provide no answers, no anchor to stop me from dropping out and drifting from one dead-end job to another, from one loveless relationship to the next, for more years than I would care to mention, until I realised that I'd had the answer all along, hidden in a dusty shoebox at the back of the wardrobe. I know I was never meant to read my mother's letters to him, She didn't know I salvaged them. And I never had the nerve to read them while she was still alive. I read them with tears in my eyes. It's there in every line of close-packed writing. In the way she tried to keep him up to date with the comings and goings in suburban London, tried to compete against the golden splendour of his exotic imaginings. It wobbles once or twice, like a top spinning down. A grumble, a direct plea, a half-hearted ultimatum, before that final short missive. The one that ends so abruptly. The one that tells him that she doesn't love him anymore. And then I knew. I knew why she hadn't coped when my father had died. Knew why she had succumbed to the black despair. Knew why she had ended it all. Without being able to explain why, not to me, not to herself, not to anybody. I knew then that the biggest lie my parents ever told wasn't about the dinosaurs on the underground, or the Paraguayan Navy. It wasn't even one of my father's. It was the desperate, self-protecting final line of that last letter. It was my mother's.